Well, Parliament is set to return on the 22nd of November, and we are told to expect a flurry of legislation. Some of it new, some of it we have seen before, perhaps dressed up in a different number or a different title, but it will be back. And two of the troubling pieces that we have been discussing a lot on this podcast are Bill C-10 and Bill C-36. What they will be called later, we don't know, but what we do know is that both of these pieces of legislation severely constrict free speech, that they are in fact bills that are based on the concept of censorship. I don't know. It's very hard to get people worked up about this, but honestly, we have found somebody who is most concerned. Tim Denton, he is the chairman of the Internet Society, but he knows wherever he speaks with all of these issues because he was the former national commissioner of the CRTC up until 2013 and worked inside the federal government trying to create communications and internet policy without much success. As he looks at these two bills, he calls them creepily totalitarian. Now, this needs a little bit of explanation, but let me first welcome Tim Denton. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to be here.
This is the thing, you know, we all get up in the morning and we hear something on the television or the radio and we say, you know what, if I was running the world, I'd just ban that. And what you've advised us to do is sit back and think about what if somebody else was in charge of making those decisions about what should be banned? What if they didn't agree with us? I think that idea, just explore that a bit.
Well, yeah. What can I tell you? It's the purpose of freedom of speech is not to agree, not to be nice, to be, as argumentative as necessary. But here we are in a situation where we've got two bills before us. Broadcasting is basically a regime of you get to speak with permission of the state. And the C-36 online harms has got its own panoply of controls and measures, which, if possible, exceed C-10 by far. They're going to be unworkable, and they're going to be, I think, unconstitutional in the old-fashioned sense of outside the powers of the federal government. They may also be I think they're almost certain to be taken down in terms of issues of freedom of speech, charter issues. But they're really very unpleasant pieces of legislation. One of the things we saw, and I'll deal with C-36 first.
Yep.
One of the problems I had facing it was I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I really had difficulty imagining the mindset of the people who devise this kind of stuff, because it's creepily totalitarian, and something you might expect out of China or Russia or Turkey is being proposed for a well-established liberal democracy, and it's taking that. Go ahead.
No, I want to drill down on that a bit, because you worked inside that bureaucracy for many years, and of course with the CRTC. This is a chicken and egg question, because these bills emerge. I mean, a minister stands up, the former minister, Mr. 𝘕𝘰 said, we're going to just shut it down if speech criticizes the government, or if we don't like it, we're just going to shut it down. Now, does the bureaucracy then say, okay, that's the minister's view of the world, we'll go and write something that reflects that? Or somehow inside the system, have they put out that Goldilocks, this porridge is just right piece of legislation in front of the minister?
It's hard to tell. The ideal bureaucrat is, in some sense, a bowling, a ball bearing who will roll any which way the political direction is given. But there are sort of issues of fundamental concern that they ought perhaps to be warning their minister, yes, but there's only An old DM friend of mine once said, there's only two answers a civil servant should give. Yes, minister, and yes, minister, but.
But
And these
we have this
people
little
ought to
thing
be.
called the Charter of Rights, Minister.
Yes, and pragmatic considerations of, excuse my old-fashioned term, machinery of government, is how many
Yeah.
people are going to be involved in the making of these kinds of regulations. Is there clear accountability? Is there, what are the premises of what's going on, and do they make sense? The C-36 assumes that certain people or peoples or tribes or groups are permanently offended, and other people are therefore permanently offensive. And its assumptions are that some people are not merely offended, but will remain offended forever, and therefore the judges of the speech should be drawn predominantly, if not exclusively, from the offended groups. And it's just wokeness written into legislation, and it's I keep saying this to a liberal government. It's illiberal.
Yeah.
The principal objection to it, conservative, liberal, or NDP, is that this stuff is illiberal. It's premised on really bad ideas that are working their way through society at the moment. And this is what we're getting.
Over the course of the summer, when the government was supposedly holding hearings on this, where people could present briefs about what they thought about C10 and these issues of censorship and free speech, all of which were held ironically, or maybe not so, behind closed doors. And so people had to print their own, presentations so that others could read them. But what we saw in that group of people that are concerned, as you are, is the full range. They came from every corner of the political spectrum, and they were all saying the same thing. I mean, take this back to the drawing board, boys and girls. We need a rethink. Let's go on Bill C-36 for a moment. So everybody is concerned about what is going to happen to young kids if they grow up online, essentially living their life that way, the kind of things that they'll have access to seeing, the kind of forces that are there. Are we setting up impossible standards for young kids to meet in terms of their beauty or brains or wealth or whatever it may be? But we have laws to deal with some of the worst offenses that we see, hate speech, for example, or pornography, or the illegal use of images of children. So what are they trying to accomplish with this bill? Because laws exist to take the worst offensive material off.
I'm going to give you one of my answers. Yes. And to a great degree.
You can expand.
Okay. Permission to speak, madam.
Yes, permission to speak granted. Yep.
First of all, one of the many points of objection to C-36 is that it tries to give to the federal cabinet itself the power to depart from previous legal standards of what hate speech or various others of these crimes are, to expand them by order in council, so that right now, for instance, a lot of the things that are properly the subject of criminal prosecution are well-established legal standards that are worked out by judges and lawyers in conjunction with trials. Now, where C-36 departs from the idea of parliamentary government, I mean, in other words, Parliament laying down laws, is that they seek to expand or permit the expansion of various categories of crime by order in council. And so that's one of the many features of C-36 that is just obnoxious.
So that means it doesn't go through any debate in the House of Commons. There's just kind of a decision at the cabinet level, and they say, we're just going to add this to the list of stuff we don't like.
Yes. Sorry, that's too short an answer.
No, I love that
Yes.
answer. Well, what do you make of the recent decision by the Supreme Court? And this was about a comedian who had said something offensive about another individual, 5-4 ruling. But Justice Wagner wrote that limits to free speech should only be invoked in the case of immediate threats of actual harm. So this is not, gee, I think, women belong at home in the kitchen. This has got to be actual direct harm to someone.
Well, I think that's probably a very sound policy to restrict the ambit of what needs to be controlled. What disturbed me somewhat was that judgment was only 5-4. We're not living in a very liberal era when it comes to speech. We're living in an area that's got many anxieties, verging on hysterias about the dangers of unfettered discussion. There seems to be very little belief on the part of recent college graduates in the ability of society to find for itself reasonable accommodations with dissent. We're in an era of very considerable anxieties, it seems to me, from let's just be brutal. Let's just call it snowflakes. But when you have college kids going through and believing that saying something offensive is an ever expanding category of things which are offensive, and not really believing in a process of reasoned debate, because the only issue for universities nowadays is who has power,
right?
And therefore all discussion is put through this kind of ringer. So I think we're seeing some of the baneful effects of this kind and style of thinking emerging in legislation, because a more confident, a more liberal, in the proper sense of that term, a more confident liberal society would be much less inclined to seek these levels of control. And it's a basic lack of cultural confidence that reason can and should prevail, I think, which is behind this. I mean, I'm seeking, as Jonathan Haidt, the American sociologist and psychologist, has done a great deal about discussing this kind of new generations of people, very anxious, helicopter parented, and much
never failed.
concern. Yeah, never failed, and got a gold star for coming into the classroom on time. So I think that there's much broader forces at work than simply Justin and Stephen Guilbeault behaving badly. Though I think they're behaving badly. I think there's much more behind it.
Very troubling, because it is what you're getting at. I mean, I remember my days on university campus. You fought things out with each other. There were, the Marxists and the socialists and the capitalists, and you got into debate in cafeterias and in classrooms. You were still able to disagree if a professor made a comment. But it was use your words and use your ideas and try and make a better argument to convince. Don't ban the other person from speaking things you disagree with.
Yeah, I remember a much more robust debate, but usually it was 60 Marxists versus 15 non-Marxists at McGill when I was there. I wasn't a Marxist then, and I'm not a Marxist now, but it just, that style of discussion was threatened then, but somehow it hung on, and somehow the professoriate was sufficiently diverse in its opinions. At the moment, I think we've got a professoriate which is, if not woke, then is disguising the fact that it isn't woke. Which is basically an idea of everything is power and everything should result in equality of outcome. But those two simple, stupid ideas, freedom is being crushed. And the instruments of that crushing are C10, you will speak with permission, and C136, you will speak with an eye over your shoulder for what the censors will say. I don't think censorship does the society any good. I mean, if you look at the effects on social society of the former Inquisition in Spain and Portugal, they went through 400, 500 years of increasing stagnation because people weren't able to say anything. And these kinds of regimes can last a long time. And I fear that we are, for all the wrong reasons, they will say all the right reasons, for all the wrong reasons, people think we need a new form of social conformity to ensure that nothing really gets said which is unwoke, unadvised.
But is that a fear? I mean, when we see governments putting forward legislation like this, and it's we're seeing it in the US as well, and other places, you've talked about that lack of confidence and the slow, quiet build of this before people really have figured out what's actually happening. But what is the point of this? Do governments think they'll be able to stay in office forever if their critics are silenced? Do they think people will stop thinking different thoughts or thoughts that disagree? Like, what's the intent?
Can I tell you a little story? It's
Please.
A good one. It has exactly to do with this. I once knew a fellow who was in the Canadian embassy in Moscow during the Brezhnev period.
Yeah.
And years later, I ran into him at the supermarket and said, is there any kind of freedom of discussion in the Soviet Union, as it then was? And he said, yes, absolutely. What do you mean? He said, if you're out on the ice, in your tent, ice fishing, beyond the reach of the microphones, they have the most amazing discussions. They're absolutely trammeled free discussion, but everybody has to have known each other since high school. Right. And they're not going to be eavesdropped upon by anyone. And they'll talk about stuff that we wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole here. Was Hitler right to invade the Soviet Union? Would be a discussion that some people would have in the Soviet Union, but they would be a very tight group that would not ever, then they just leave the tent, go on with ice fishing, and not ever discuss anything they discussed. And so, is there going to be free discussion in the future? Yes, freedom of discussion will be untrammeled and absolute between 2 or 3 people who've known each other from high school and who do not publish, blog, or speak publicly about what they've said. And I think this is the concern I have, is that there will always be untrammeled discussion among certain people. But the general rule is watch what you say very carefully, because Big Brother, Big Sister is watching.
Yeah.
And I think that is the real concern we all have about what's going on.
Do you think this is, we hear this discussion all the time, what we're seeing in universities, practically we're at book burning now, right? We can't have Marie Henein, who, defended a client because of the nature of his alleged crime, which of course was, he was freed from. Then what? What do we wait for in order? Do libraries really have to be burnt down? Do we have kids suspended from school for asking a question? I know I'm being a bit crazy here, but what is it going to take for people to say, whoa, we better think about this. This is a slippery slope.
Well, I think we're well on it. I think the universities have been taken over by wokeness, which again is everything is about power, and any inequality of result is that is statistically related to any kind of caste or religion is therefore wrong. So those two simple, stupid ideas have got everybody in a frenzy of fervor for a false religion. But societies go through periods of madness, or put it this way, society goes mad collectively, but each man recovers his sanity individually.
Yeah.
And I think the recovery of sanity will proceed individually. I mean, what's going on at the moment is as I've discussed, I think it's a great loss of confidence that rational discussion really will sort anything out, because everything is assumed to be power. And with that very simple metric, it's a reductionist, reductive method of reducing everything to who has power, which is sort of Leninist in a way. It's really, there's nothing further to be said about it.
But to your earlier point, I guess, if as long as everybody puts these rules in place and they all agree what the rules should be, the problem comes when people with views that you don't share, the government is defeated and a new government comes in, and they want to use these same rules, but in a very different way to restrict speech, so that all woke speech would be forbidden. And you know what, like there doesn't seem to be any concept of tomorrow.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I was reading something by Hugh McLennan, you may recall him,
Yes.
novelist of the 50s and 60s, and he had a marvelous expression that we're always very rapidly seeking to fix a particular and creating a problem by the immediate fix. I think that the immediate fix which the government may be seeking is to appear to do something about a perceived, I don't know, Catherine McKenna, the former Minister of Environment, gets rude words directed at her. And all of Canada in good patriarchal style is upset on her behalf. Gosh, we need to do something about this dreadful internet. I'm reducing it somewhat, but really, the impetus behind a lot of these attempts to control is very frequently their personal experience, and it's hard to say to people, toughen up, people. You're the cabinet, and they're not.
Welcome to the world of politics. You better have thicker skin.
Oh yes, I mean, I don't envy their role at all.
No,
but I don't anybody's freedom away and subjecting us to state licensing of speech, of state licensing of video, very expansive powers of after the fact, control of what you said, and this looking over the shoulders to make sure that you haven't offended the various simple but ever expanding rules of wokeness. This is not a good outcome.
Your concern about obviously this legislation, if it even remotely resembles what proposed before, would not withstand legal challenge. The core of C10, which concerned those of us who are concerned about this, is that this is going to drill down to a communication you and I may have, like the one we're having right now.
You're communicating by video across the internet. Therefore, according to C10, we are engaged in broadcasting and therefore engaged in licensable speech. And they may say, well, you don't need a license, Pamela and Tim, you just get an exemption order. So therefore you go to the exemption order and you read the exemption order, and the exemption says you're allowed to say anything you like as long as it isn't. That's regulation by exemption order. So this is not a happy outcome.
No, and I mean, when we start to get down, I don't know whether it's even technically possible to imagine that they are going to monitor all our tweets and all our blog posts and all our exchanges on the thousands of podcasts that exist, and do it all within 24 hours and take down stuff that the government may find offensive, or their censorship czar who they in turn will appoint. Do you think it's ever, is this going to go to court before it even happens, or are we going to have to fight this battle after the fact?
Oh, that's a prediction about the future, which are always very difficult.
It being a prediction and all, yes.
it will certainly be challenged in the courts.
Yeah.
Whether it's sort of before it's established or whether there may need a test case to I don't know which will be required, but it will have to be challenged. And whether, of course, the courts will does not augur well for the future if they're only 5-4 in favor of the freedom of speech question.
What about the larger issue, I guess, which is here, it seems that part of the government's intention here is to make sure that Canadian content, and particularly Quebec content or French language content, is protected. When we spoke to Peter Menzies about this, he said, look, if you want the big tech giants to just contribute to the development funds and pay their money, they'll write checks. Trying to do this the other way by censoring them or punishing them is not going to have the desired outcome. If you're trying to just make sure there's more Canadian content on the internet, quit trying to squelch Canadians from making it or giving voice to it.
Well, of course, Menzies is right about everything, as always.
I'll tell him you said so. I'll tell him you said so.
But you see, the trick that lies behind C10 is the almost unlimited expansion of that which is called broadcasting. Right. And broadcasting means licensing, and licensing means various levels of control. So when the broadcast system was predicated originally on ideas of how many speakers there could be and how many listeners. Very few speakers, very many listeners. Everything that has happened since then, of course, has blown that up. I mean, there's now on the internet, there's very, very, very many speakers. We're liberated from scheduled TV programming. We're liberated from many of the assumptions that made broadcasting, in some sense, legitimately a subject of licensing. And the C10 takes, basically explodes the concept of broadcasting. So it doesn't have to be by over-the-air technology. It doesn't have to be scheduled. And there was a third, his time was measured. But anyway, they just exploded it in 3 dimensions so that everything is broadcasting unless we say it ain't. And so this is the craziness of C10. Peter Menzies is completely right. They said if they could have taxed the large, taxed them in some way, that would be fine. It was the expansion of the domain of what is licensable activity, which is really objectionable. I don't mind subsidization of right. TV or other production. Catalonia, Denmark, Greece, Bulgaria, England, France, everybody subsidizes artistic production. That is not the question. And I think that particularly you get it in French Canada as a, they just don't like us there because we're French or something like that. It's like, hello, folks. We're actually concerned about what we say we're concerned about, which is freedom to express ourselves. Your subsidies are safe. Yeah. Relax. Yeah. Your subsidies are safe. What is not safe is our freedom to speak without licensing from the state. And for some people, that just hasn't arrived at that opposition to C10 in various quarters may actually be a question of principle. Right. And since they don't see principles themselves, they don't see principles in others. But
it's also kind of such an outdated approach. I mean, we do this from time to time as industries change. You can't take the rules for the horse and buggy and apply it to the Teslas on the road, right? You need different rules.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. That's what they're doing.
And that's what you see, which is, okay, we have this whole structure, the CRTC and the rules, and it's all about broadcasting. So instead of saying we need to think a new thought here and invent some rules for the world where the internet is it, not your 3 channels that we used to get in the 50s and 60s. But like, let's have a new structure. Is there nobody inside saying the internet is a very different beast than a television station? And so we need to put that away, let the television station still be monitored that way, and have Canadian content rules, and you can't swear or say nasty things. And then we're going to try and have some structure that reflects this global, gateless world that we are all in.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to phone you every week, and we're going to do a 5-minute interview, and I'm going to ask you 10 questions, and you're going to say yes, and this is great. Okay, carry on.
So look, I listened to the principal idea man of the Broadcasting Telecom Legislative Review, which gave rise to this, is Peter Grant, who is probably the Canada's best and most significant industry lobbyist lawyer for the. Yeah. And he was explaining to us that the principal problem that they were seeking to solve was the continuing sort of getting money from the large new platforms into Canadian broadcasting. And sort of once you set the problématique, once you set the basic idea of what you're supposed to be accomplishing as that, then everything flows logically that you have to proceed along the lines of protecting. And by the way, I once did a back of the envelope calculation. We spend about as much on subsidization of TV programming, including the CBC, as we spend on the Navy. I'm ready for correction on that if anyone's got better figures, but it was kind of like $5, $6, $7 billion bucks a year, non-trivial amounts of money.
Exactly.
And so very large quantities of money are being sent into an industry which subsidizes certain kinds of productions, largely in our urban centers, towards urban elites in Montreal, Toronto, and some ways in Vancouver. Now, the money flow, the money must flow. Okay. If you assume that you want to maintain subsidization, you might start thinking about starting with Canadian broadcasting policy shall be set by consumers. Right now, we have a production-oriented Soviet tractor system where, that which is produced is decided upon by central planners or relatively small number of planners in the broadcasting industry, abetted and aided by government flows of funds. And the consumer nowhere sits in that picture of making is the sovereign decider. And I don't mind, subsidization of TV production. It's not my, it's not my big passion in life. But if you have to do that, do that. But here we have a system in which the Broadcasting Act, in which consumer tastes were mentioned. I don't think they're really mentioned at all. We have a highly regulated system, a narrow number of players, and lots of money flowing in their direction to keep them, all those set decorators and scene makers and script writers and producers, busy. But the end result of it doesn't seem to reach the consumer in a way that the consumer finds attractive. Well, that's because the consumer is not at the core of what broadcasting policy is about.
If you look at the subsidy to the CBC relative to their viewers, which are declining and decreasing, you could send everybody at home a videotape. I mean, I'm exaggerating only slightly, but there is just not that, as you say, there's nowhere where the market or the attitude and likes and dislikes of the viewer or the consumer actually comes into play.
You unfroze?
You're unfrozen now. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, it's always mutual, right? Because when you freeze, I'm here busy talking away, and you're frozen.
Yes, exactly.
It's sort of like that, fog in the Channel continent is isolated from the London Times. Anyway, where were we? having a good.
Oh, okay. Well, the thing is that it was your point really, which is, the degree of the subsidy to the CBC, or the degree to which we declare Canadian content to be A-OK because there's one cameraman who's Canadian on the shoot, not whether or not the story reflects our own country or our own history. There's, even the definition of Canadian content is pretty bizarre, but there's no way for the consumer to be reflected in the policies that they're laying out, or the statement of the market.
Yes. So this is what and I think this is a classic example of if you're not really winning, make illegal the business model of the other person. And Netflix, Amazon, Crave, whatever there's tons, there's just millions and millions and millions of bucks being put into scripted television development these days. But it's coming through platforms and new ways of doing business. And we haven't sat down really to consider what the real problem is. We've assumed that we've assumed that the problem is there's a threat to the existing player, and therefore we need to intensify our efforts to keep the existing players subsidized. And
the challengers silent.
Yes, or captive. We have to harness. These wonderful words of the of the CRTC and broadcasting policy, which is like everything has to be harnessed so that the internet becomes a pack mule for the carrying the bits in the service of a very a tight group of people in Toronto and Montreal who will continue to produce the stuff we're not watching. So.
No, go ahead. You can finish that thought, but I want to do this in the context of, I don't know whether anybody can you hear me? I'm just saying, oh yeah, there's movement. Okay. I don't know whether, we talk about having an intelligent internet strategy for today and the future. Can we really do that? Is there a way to ever in the world treat the internet, which is not ours, it's a global property, and so are its users and producers. Can we ever have a strategy or a policy the way in which we did with domestic broadcasting, or do we just have to say this is a different beast?
Well, it's a different beast, and you needed to have a fresh and original thought from people who might have had some experience with how the internet is constructed and how it works. We had the same old players charging up the same old hill in the same old fashion under the Broadcasting Telecom Legislative Review, everything. And we didn't sit down with open minds to think about what broadcasting needs to be, or what cultural entertainment programming needs to be in an internet environment. Now, we do have some people who actually are doing that in Canada because they're just making deals and making programs and making money. But they weren't consulted. We had a very narrow basis of consultation at the Broadcasting Telecom Legislative Review, a very fixed set of premises of how to save the broadcasting system. And we have gotten, charged up the same old hill in the same old way, only this time with more feeling,
Yeah. I just that very basic concept though of free speech and free expression, and that, in whatever form creators do that. If I'm watching a channel on the television and I don't like the program, or I think it's poorly made, or I don't like their biases, you know what? I actually change the channel. And somehow we've lost sight of that as a very basic right of a consumer, of a user, to make those choices.
Yes.
So how do we do that? How do we keep that sense of control and participation? For me, I want to see things on on the screen, this one or the other one that I find offensive, and have a reaction to it and respond in some way or move on. Those are choices I want as an intelligent being that wants to keep thinking.
Intelligent being that wants to keep thinking. Obviously, you're a menace to the state and need to be told to shut up. I mean, I come back to it that, guys like Stephen Guilbeault have all the imagination of 𝘕𝘰 𝘕𝘰𝘯𝘴𝘦. I mean, these people are fanatics and simple-minded, intelligent enough to pursue a goal, but they're not. These are not. It's like they hadn't gone to university. It's like they hadn't really understood that there's six sides to every question, and then they all need to be discussed. And when you get this kind of illiberal person in government, you tend to get answers more suitable for sergeants than for colonels or generals. You tend to get you do as we tell you, and it'll be good, and buckle up and do as we ask. And I don't think we're seeing the results of sophisticated thinking here. I think we're seeing the results of highly directive people who have got simple wrong ideas in their heads and have been told, at least by some experts, that extending state control is a good idea and we need more of it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure they actually were told that at all. I think they, on a daily basis, are being told the opposite. I think the question is are they listening?
What do you think our ministers are being told?
Well, I mean, this is being portrayed as a way to protect Canadian content or to keep harmful speech off the internet. I mean, as you say, in a very simplistic, if you thought about it for 30 seconds, you'd go, yeah, but what about the consequences? Yes, but what about this? But the discussion seems to have stopped there.
I don't think there's really is significant discussion inside the Secretary of State Department, Heritage Department, and Industry Canada, which has usually played the role of talking from a more telecom, more internet-y, has been silenced or silent. As soon as they lost that, forgive me, I forget his name, the Sikh fellow from Toronto, who was actually quite good.
Yes.
He was he excluded himself, and maybe because he saw the writing on the wall.
Navdeep Bains, yeah.
Navdeep Bains. I liked him. I thought he was, was on the money, but he absented himself from there's a discussion going on inside government of any seriousness as to what's going on. And of course, can you imagine a serious discussion of anything with the current prime minister at the head of the table? It's inconceivable to me.
Well, one phrase that you use in some of your writings, and I'd like you just to explain it a little bit. What we have witnessed in Canada from both telecom and broadcasting sectors is a full-scale war on permissionless innovation. Yes. Is that what you're saying, that like this is back to the consumer needs to be involved in this, the market?
Well, I think that the previous systems we had at a technical level, like broadcasting and the old phone system, prior to computers, it was extremely expensive to innovate, and the systems were sort of single-purpose systems, had very limited purposes. The internet was a kind of, as I say, an Esperanto for machines that allowed machines of different makes to talk to each other and communicate. It therefore also did something extremely important, which is not much appreciated, is that by separating the internet as a set of protocols that separate the hardware, if you'll excuse that expression, from the software, overgeneralization. But generally speaking, that's what it does. So then you could innovate at the application layer. And by the application layer, just think of a TV program as an application, or TikTok or YouTube or any kind of thing that happens as an application. You could innovate there for millions or tens of millions of bucks. You didn't need to have billions of bucks to change the underlying machinery. So the internet
genius of the internet was to separate what had theretofore been united. The program was hardwired into the hardware. And by separating these two layers, these idea of applications from hardware, you allowed innovation to occur because you could now just there's an app for that, right? You can download the app. Well, yeah. in a previous era, you couldn't download anything. It was impossible. So what the internet did was to lower the cost of innovation and remove the blockages to innovation. Now, as we all know, people hate innovation, especially when it gores their ox. Yeah. And that's what's really been going on is that the incumbents in both broadcasting and telecoms have been doing their best to limit the damage caused to their business models by the internet. From a completely cynical point of view, which I strongly advise that you do, you will see that both broadcasting and telecom people really would like to control the market entry that otherwise would take place from the internet and new applications. So maybe if we just followed the money, we all would be explained.
That's a great explanation of where the.
Is that dark enough for you?
Yeah, it is. It is really. And here you were just being so cheery and just answering yes to every question that I answered. And then
well, it's because I agree. When I disagree, I'll let you know.
Yes, I bet you will. Honestly, this is great. I'm sorry to our listeners and viewers because of all the dropouts, but I'm telling you, it's worth it anyway, because you'll still hear the thread of this, and maybe we won't be in such remote locations the next time we talk. I'm just here in the middle of a snowstorm about to happen, but I think you're not. You got sunshine there. I can see it coming.
Oh, we have sleet and rain.
Okay, maybe that's it. Thank you so much, Tim. It's
delightful.
It's really. We'll be back to you next week on any topic that we can think of, and you'll just say yes to all the questions, and it'll be great.
Let's just do this again. Well, if I find something I disagree with, and I'll say no in no uncertain terms. But
okay, I'm going to find something. Next time, I'm going to start by saying I think Bill C-10 is a brilliant piece of legislation.
I do too. As long as you're aiming at total control, I think it's brilliant.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Okay.
Denton, Chairman of the Internet Society, former Commissioner of the CRTC. We will talk again soon. Bye for now.
Delighted. Bye-bye now.
Bye. And that is it for No Nonsense for this edition.